Okay, well, the very first thing you're going to want to do is, of course, install LabVIEW 2020. But to get access to the support for developing for and deploying to the NI web server, you'll want to make sure that when you're installing LabVIEW 2020 under the additional items, that you do have selected NI web server development support for LabVIEW 2020. So make sure you do that. You can always install it afterwards, but it's just a lot easier this way. So when we get started, I've got LabVIEW 2020, and really all I'm going to do is open an existing LabVIEW web service project. So I mean, my favorite is the weather monitor station. So I'm going to open up the weather monitor station example. And if you've never worked with this before, it has everything you need. It has a complete web service. It has a client. So it's a great example for learning how to use web services. So I've got my weather monitor project. If you look at the project, you can see here that it has the client application and the server application. Now we will be hosting the server application on the NI web server. And that's the new feature in LabVIEW 2020. So to do that, let me expand the server application, and I can see the web service here. I can also see that under the build specifications, I actually do already have a weather simulator server executable set up. So what I'm going to do is right click this and go to properties. And under properties, I can see some information, but what I want to look at is web services. So I have the web services here. You can see here that I can still use the application web server. It's the web server that we've had for a long time in LabVIEW, but now you have the ability to deploy to the NI web server. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm good to go. So after that, I can build the application. And once I build this and it completes, I'll be able to. So when you run this executable, it'll deploy the weather monitor web service and the weather simulator VI to the NI web server, um, and all by simply selecting that option. So I'm done building. I'm going to go to press Explore so I can see the build pretty easily. Before I do this, so when I open this up, it's going to be deployed onto the NI web server. But um, the first time you open up the NI web server, it will prompt you to set it up. Uh, I've done this already, so I'm just going to go through the guided setup again. But this is what you'll see when you open the web server for the first time. And one of the main features of using the NI web server is that you get access to all these security settings, and it takes care of it for you, because it's a production grade server. So since I'm just debugging my web application, and I also recommend doing this for if you're playing around with this for the first time, is to choose something like simple local access. I'm just going to be using my local PC to develop my application and make sure it works correctly. And I don't want to open up security vulnerabilities or allow anyone else to access the server right now. So I'm going to select that, go to the next process. So I'm going to keep login using an admin user for server administration, and I have to make a password. So I'll just do something pretty simple here. And then I'll select my HTTP port. I could use the default port for 80. Yeah, so I will choose 80 and then go next. Now I get a configuration summary for everything that I've set up. So I've got my HTTP port on 80. It's disabled all the security settings because I'm only accessing this on local, and it will only let local connections happen. Again, just because I'm setting this up for the first time and starting to work on it. So I'm going to finish that up, and then it's going to start up the web server. And once you've developed your application and you want to, let's say, make it accessible across your network or even make it accessible publicly, you'll go back into the NI web server and change those configurations. Okay, so that is all ready to go. So now, if I run my weather simulator executable, I'll let this make changes. I have my weather data simulator running. So that is ready to go. So that's running just fine. So now to test this out, I will open the existing client application that comes with this example. So if I open Weather Monitor, okay, set to port 80, and then yeah, so let's start this Weather Monitor application. And so this client is going to be accessing and using the web services that this weather simulator is running. So if I press start, I can see the updated graphs and information. So great, I have a pre-existing LabVIEW application, and you'd want to use something like this because when you're using the web services and the desktop environment of LabVIEW, or a built application running on a development PC or deployed PC, you can really get the full advantages of LabVIEW. You can have an application that's working with hardware, doing intensive calculations or analysis or data storage, and you'd want that happening on a system like this, and then using the web services to communicate out to a lighter client that can then interact with this system that's collecting all the data, that's running hardware, connecting to hardware, and so forth. Um, but so you can see here that it's working just fine. I've got the graph view, and if I change this to raw values, I can see those come in. Great. And to tie this all together, I'll just go ahead and stop that. I've also developed a really simple WebVI. So if I've got LabVIEW NXG open, and in my WebVI, it's really just doing a really simple call to the weather server simulator. So if I open up my WebVI, and I started building this, but I'm just using the WebVI template that's included on the launch screen when you open up LabVIEW NXG. I made a little weather monitor here. I can see the last weather values. I'm charting the weather values that I get, and then I can also see all of the JSON weather output. And I've got some connection info that I can look at in case I have issues. So I can go to one thing to note that this is the front, this is the panel, and if I select panel right here, I've made this a flexible layout. So what this means is that when I look at the WebVI and I maybe look at it on a smaller size screen, I'll see that flex and whatnot. But if we go to the diagram, I can see here my web services call. I've got my URL here. I'm getting the JSON values from the weather service, and then I'm just mapping those out on the panel here. So one thing that I did notice is that I know I started on 80, so why don't I just make that the default? But I've set that up to where I can change that when the app is running. So I have this WebVI already created. Let's run it. And I also mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but now you can use the LabVIEW NXG when you're building a WebVI, when you're in the environment, and you choose Run in Browser, it automatically runs on the NI web server. And if you're using the System Link API, using System Link tags and messages, I mean, those services are housed in the NI web server as well. So it makes it more like your actual application and easier to debug and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and run this in browser. So it's going to build real quick, and then we can see my other web client running in the browser. So It's working. I'm getting values. I can see my values come in here, and I can actually see all of the JSON weather output. So it is working great. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I've got the flexible layout enabled. So when, let's say I'm, opening this up on a cell phone or whatnot, when I see this flex a different size screen, it's going to flex and adapt to the screen size so that I can actually see what I need to see. Okay, but again, you would only use the run in browser if you're when you're still building the WebVI. Now I want to actually build it and host it on the NI web server. So what I'm going to do is open up the gcomp, and this is where I'm going to build my actual application. So I'm going to go ahead and select build. And so my WebVI is going to build. I can see the output directory here. And then to make it easy to host it on the web server, if I go open up my system designer, I can see the web server here and the software that's targeted underneath it, which is my web app. But if I click on this server, what I'll have to do to host my WebVI is copy the build underneath the web server file. So if I go to the root directory, I can open that up. So all I have to do is copy and paste my build output to this folder here. So if I go back to the gcomp where I built this, I can also select on the output directory, open up that window, and if I copy this and I open up this guy right here, okay, now that I have the WebVI hosted underneath the NI web server, I can see it running in my browser. So if I open up my browser here, I actually have the manual open, and so explains how to post things on the NI web server. So I'll be using this URL to help me out. So if I want to access my web app, the name of my web app is just index. So I'll replace that, and then I'm on port 80, so I'll be changing that to 80. So if I go to this, I can see I'm accessing my WebVI hosted on the NI web server. Yeah, and so the next step would really be, now that I have this working on my development system, I would go back to the NI web server, change a few of those settings, and then start working on trying to implement the system to where I can access my WebVI on my local internet only, on my local network. Maybe if I wanted to make it public, I would go back here and start configuring those settings to make that possible. So we've seen a quick demonstration of using the